and get some feedback. So again, thank you all for joining. My name is Liad Ortar. Hold on. Yeah. My name is Liad Ortar. I live in Israel. And what I'm gonna present today is the outline of my doctoral project, the research project that I've been conducting in the last 3 years, basically trying to set up a new framework called corporate gerontology, and hopefully being able to justify that in a scholarly way to you all. Of course, any feedback, ideas is warmly welcome. Concerning the dissertation was just submitted for our internal processes, and hopefully we're gonna get that through in the coming weeks. And I do have to say that the work has been done in the Department of Gerontology in the University of Haifa with 2 advisors, Professor Issi Doron, who was the former head of this department, is quite a known scholar in the field of gerontology, ageism, and Professor Yotam Luria, who's a professor in business ethics from the Ben-Gurion University in the Negev. So that's kind of and you can see also there is a logo here in the presentation of the Israeli Corporate Social Responsibility Institute that I'm its head in the last 4 years. So a little bit about me, just to get you to know who you're talking with. I think it's just nice to see who's giving you the presentation. So that's me here on the left. I'm partner with Ofer, and these are 2 kids. They're bigger now, Ohad and Maya. Now they're almost 6 years old. I was born in Haifa. Haifa is a city in the north part of Israel, and now we live in kind of a village or in settlement in the middle of Israel called Pardes Chana. I think a very important issue in my professional and of course my private life, which reflects toward my professional life, is that's my grandmother. Her name is Ada Salama. She is now 95 years old. And that's Ohad and Maya when they were very, very young. And that's also 2 of my cousins. That's 4 of her great grandchildren. And I'm her caregiver here in Israel because my mother and my uncle do not live in Israel. So I'm the one who's just trying to ease life for her. And I think writing or researching on aging while experiencing that in firsthand, it's a different experience, with very concrete and personal perspective. The starting point of this presentation is the COVID-19, the coronavirus epidemic. Although you probably can imagine that the fact that I've been doing that for the last 3 years, that wasn't the starting point of my research project. The research project started 3 years ago, my doctoral project, and it's become even more relevant now. Probably all of us that are dealing with the issue of caring for old people and the fact that the disease harms so much, especially the older persons in our community, in our society, made it justified for me the cause of the research. But I can tell you that from trying to follow up events here in Israel and in the world, I think one of the major blind spots is what's happening in the privately owned homes for the elders. The government alone are quite well, not well, they are managed, but in Israel it's really a blind spot, and that brings me back to the question that I started about 3 years ago, 4 years ago. Why and how business corporations are dealing with older people as clients, as customers, as former employees, and the fact that there is a need to treat them differently. The title of my research project is called CSR 65.0. I will not go now into the tell you exactly why I termed that 65.0. Do that at the end of the presentation. But the aim of the research project was, because now it's completed, to explore, identify, and present the social responsibilities of business cooperation in face of humanity aging population. So what I've constructed, what I've built is basically a multidisciplinary discourse, or multidisciplinary discussion, joining in a joint sphere between aging, what we call social gerontology, and business literature, the business academic work. And corporate gerontology is this kind of field that is that both of them are relevant to. And I think that's a main challenge, and whoever is dealing with multidisciplinary research knows the challenge of that, because basically you have to introduce each of the to the discipline to the other one. So if I'm talking to people from gerontology scholars, so I need to explain them a little bit about business ethics, and what is CSR, and I'm going to do that in a minute. And when I'm talking to scholars in business ethics and CSR, I need to explain them all about gerontology. So that's quite a challenging thing, which makes that even more fascinating, the road. But as most scholars know, that's quite a barrier when trying to publish papers, because in academic papers they are very disciplined, narrow perspective, and you really need to address the discipline that each of the journal is embracing. So, but that's what I did in this project. So I'll start with a brief introduction to CSR, because I think most of the participants here in our Zoominar this evening are not very well aware of this concept. And the concept of CSR CSR basically is an acronym, and in the longer version, it is corporate social responsibility. And there are various definitions for CSR, and I will not give you the whole spectrum of definitions. I will just go to one of the major institutional definition, which is of the European Union. And CSR is defined by the European Commission as the responsibility of enterprises for their impact on society. Enterprises should have in place a process to integrate social, environmental, ethical, human rights, and consumer concerns into their business operations and core strategy in close collaboration with their stakeholders. So CSR is basically kind of the ethical wrapping of the conduct of a corporation, with a very with the paradigm which is to do no harm. So a corporation needs on the one hand to increase its profits for the sake of its shareholder, and that's still the dominant paradigm of the capitalist system, in which the corporation is the major financial tool in order to receive in order to gain social benefits, taxation, and what we call the trickle-down economy. Although recent research is proving quite sharply that this trickle-down economy is not really working, and we can see it even now in the COVID-19 epidemic, that corporations are seeking refuge in the shores of the state, of the countries, for bailout programs and all of those things. There are a few grand theories in the field of CSR. I think, as I just told, first one is the capitalist system in which we all live. Milton Friedman, we all know him quite well, about that the only responsibility of a business is to generate revenue and to maximize the shareholder value. Following that, during the 80s, a new theory came on board, was presented by Edward Freeman from Georgia, from the US, and that's the stakeholder theory, basically taking apart the business corporation, not only to its legal and binding treaties and contracts, but also to all the societal stakeholders, all of those groups that have interaction of influence, which means they are influenced by the corporation or influenced they're influencing the corporation or being influenced by the corporation, and basically turning the corporation into a social entity. And it's not a coincidence that this theory came forth during the period of the privatization and the withdrawal of the welfare state. Later on, we have the legitimacy theory, what we call license to operate by Mark Schumann, in which we identify the relations that the public or the customers are having with this business corporation, based on legitimacy. So the fact that we are going to buy, I don't know, product in a supermarket or financial services, whatever, it means we issue a social license for this corporation to sell us those services or those products, and that's what we call the social license to operate. Later on, about 10 years ago, there was it's not a new theory, but a new version of kind of a theory which called the shared value theory by Porter and Kramer, basically saying that there is a way to address the urgent or the social, environmental, and health needs of the bottom of the pyramid by cooperation, and by that gaining profits, both societal profit and corporate financial profit, and that's the shared value. It's a kind of bringing forth a win-win situation for society and for the corporation. So CSR in general is a quite vast and diverse field of academic literature, and that was my starting point while immersing myself into the area of gerontology. But I came from the field of CSR. I wrote papers about that. I taught CSR, and as I told you before, I'm the head of the CSR Institute here in Israel. And taking into account what we started in the presentation, so there's kind of a societal harm that is being brought upon elders by corporations, and I thought, well, there's an academic need first to define that, and then also later to try and present some alternatives for that. The doctoral project was constructed kind of as a rolling academic endeavor and academic inquiry. The first one is setting the base, or the fundamentals, or the infrastructure, the theoretical infrastructure on which we can continue to build the construct that is being presented in paper 2 and paper 3. In paper 1, that's a paper in which I institute or present or set forth this concept of corporate gerontology. Corporate gerontology was articulated as in relation to the fact that all of the other gerontological literature is termed social gerontology, and I thought that social gerontology is good for me, but it's not good enough. It's not very well focused on what I'm trying to say. And what I'm trying to say here, that there's a need to differentiate the acts and the behavior of corporations in relations to other agents, to other players in society, such as NGOs, such as the government, such as multinational organizations like the UN, WHO, and other organizations. And there's really a need to say that the corporation is a different kind of actor. It is an actor which is defined by its imperative to generate revenue, and we need to differentiate that from other players. And that's a very important definition, or the very important step I'm doing at the first paper. So at the first paper, I'm exploring the context through which gerontology academic literature is addressing the manner in which cooperation interact with, influence, and are influenced by older persons and the aging society. And in order to do that, I've just did a systematic literature review of all the papers, all the, of course, academic papers in which the business cooperation appears in the context of aging, of gerontology, whatever it will be. And I've just looked up for all of the papers in which the cooperation appears, and then asked myself in what context this institute appears. What I found out, and I'm just showing you here very brief outline of the result of the different papers. Of course, I will be able to send it in full later on, once my dissertation is approved and approved and published, and then I will have it, and then it will be available through our library or through me. But I can show you now just kind of outline of the result. So what I tried to look is how cooperation are presented. Are there influence? Are there like kind of the active player influencing aging as a societal challenging, or are they influenced by aging, like saying opening, just like new markets opening up for corporations, the aging of the workforce, and corporations are reacting to that. And the interesting thing is that out of all of the papers, the 46 papers that were surveyed, the majority belong to the category in which aging is an independent variable, and it influences the performance of business corporations and not the other way around. So basically the corporations are kind of, I don't know if passive is the right way, but they are just like the exploiting side. They're just, the papers were how can corporations be better prepared or gain more profits as a result of aging, and not contributing to the social challenge of aging. And that was a kind of a justification for me that there's really a need to create a different discourse termed corporate gerontology. And the finding of the study indicate that business cooperation as influential economic and social institution has received very little attention in the mainstream gerontology research. And you can see that quite a small number of papers that I found out in the research, and there's not a lot being talked about that. And I think that the potential for positive or for negative discourse or research about the business cooperation in context of aging is very, very important. There is one segment that there is a little bit more research about that, and that the issue of privatization of older persons' homes and establishment, and there's the findings there are very clear that those that are privately owned are showcasing worse living conditions and things like that toward older persons. Like if someone starts his way in a private home as his fit in his shape is very well, and of course they want him to join these buildings or these companies, and then when his situation is deteriorating, then they just, like, he vanishes. The special places that they put him in, they don't want him or her to be in any kind of engagement with the local residents, and that's quite clear from the literature. The second phase of the research was okay, now that we've set the general boundaries of corporate gerontology, and there's a need to differentiate, as I said before, the conduct of business corporations, then we're going to see how that implies into the issue of CSR, of corporate social responsibility, and then asking what are the ethical dimension or the moral dimension of corporate gerontology. So in corporate gerontology, there could be a lot of other very practical aspects, such as age diverse workplace, marketing for aging persons and things like that, which are all very, very important. But my perspective was the ethical perspective, as my research correlates CSR, corporate social responsibility, with aging. So I did that by looking into the global CSR schemes. CSR is a voluntary framework. It is voluntary, or what we call beyond compliance, because if a company, a corporation is required to behave in a certain way by law, then it is not an act of responsibility. You can only be responsible, a person, or what we call the moving agent, can only act responsibly if this act is being done not out of external enforcement. Now, not if you are doing something because you're afraid you're going to be fined. If you're not going to do that thing, that's not an act of responsibility. So a corporation can act responsibly only if it is doing things out of, there's quite a lot of motivation, but not out of what is required of it to do under law, under legislation. This is the reason why in CSR there are numerous numbers of schemes. Schemes can be standards, can be guidelines, can be guidances, can be all kind of compacts and things like that. So there are really quite a lot of tools. I think there are hundreds of tools. So I've looked into, I think it's 36 global CSR schemes, and I went and I started the search to see if, whether, and in what way aging appears in global CSR scheme. The research method was a mixed message approach by using NVivo. It's a software to go through a lot of documents, but also to understand in what context aging appears in those methodologies. The results here are quite clear. As I told you, I surveyed 37 CSR global schemes, only those that have relevance to social issues. There are quite a lot that are dealing with environmental, climate change, things like that, and I excluded them from the sample. And as you can see, out of those 37 global schemes, 78% do not mention in any way the issue of aging, which is quite surprising, even quite astonishing, because each and every one of us, and I think each and every one who deals with societal challenges of the modern society knows that aging is just, it's here. It's not around the corner, it's here. And we need to deal with that, and we need to deal with that properly. And corporations they need to have their way in this attitude on these strategies. But in 78%, aging doesn't appear at all. I think more importantly, or not more importantly, but the issue of age is generally mentioned in 19% of the guidelines. But I think the interesting thing for me was that most of CSR schemes, those 19%, out of those 19%, have a reference for this general not discriminating clause that is being embraced from the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, Article 2, that everyone is entitled to all rights and freedoms set forth by the declaration without distinction of any kind, such as race, color, sex, language, religion, political or other opinion. And as you can see, age is not, age is only, it's not there. But you can see that there are a lot of CSR schemes that have added to this general clause kind of thing that any kind of remedy that's being provided by those schemes shouldn't be discriminated on the basis of age. So age is kind of has a passive way in instructing corporations how to behave. So you have to do something, not excluding people on the base of age, but not doing something proactively, like creating gender diverse workplace and things like that. There's no proactively demanding corporation to do anything about people with different, from different age cohort. And that was very interesting. And probably some of you know that there's a work that's been conducted in recent years about the open-ended working group on the human rights of older persons. And I think one of the results of this paper is a justification that there is a need to create a very differentiated standalone UN Convention on the Human Rights of Older Persons, because as it is implemented today, age is not playing an active role in the conduct of in the ethical or the norm or the moral conduct of cooperation. It's only, as I told you, it's only kind of a passive demand from cooperation. This brings me to a very important let's say model in CSR, which is called the CSR pyramid, or Carroll CSR pyramid. It's Carroll CSR because that's the name of the scholar who presented this this pyramid. And as you can see, for the corporation, there is the bottom layer, or the bottom part of the pyramid, which is creating economic value of a corporation, kind of for the we know from sociology, from Maslow, but that's now we're looking not for the human being, but for the business corporations. So the basic layer, the basic level is the profit-driven behavior, which is generating economic value. Later on is upholding the legal demands of the corporation. I think that's very interesting, and some might say that the legal has to be first and then the economic, but that's the model. And then we have ethics, CSR, and this is where I proposed the ethic branching, or the ethic focusing of corporate gerontology, which is corporate geronto responsibility. And I will in a second tell you what it means. And the last phase of this pyramid is philanthropy, which is donation and voluntary community involvement. And a lot of people from CSR do not see voluntary and corporate philanthropy as an act of corporate responsibility. And if you remember from the definition as brought before from the European Union, corporate responsibility has to be an act that is being implemented in the core strategy of a business, and not something which is external to the business itself. But the second layer is what we focus in, which is the layer of the ethics of CSR, and that's corporate geronto responsibility. What does it mean in specific? It means that the firm has that in order to create a responsibility of the business corporation to stakeholders, it needs to understand who are the geronto stakeholders. As a stakeholder theory, which was presented by me earlier, means that the corporation has different relations with stakeholders, and what we've articulated here, or made that specific adjustment to what we call corporate geronto stakeholders. So the firm is here in the middle, the business corporation, and then we have aging communities, retiree associations, political group, aging employees, past generations, employees, caregivers, aging customers, etc. So in order for a corporation to build up a strategy for its corporate responsibility, it needs to understand who are its corporate geronto stakeholders. then engage with them in a dialogue, in a conversation, in order to understand the nature of the influence they have over those people, and vice versa. And then based and building upon that, they need to build up their strategy and the different answers and remedies that they provide to those different stakeholders group. Hold on. Okay. In the last paper that the last stage of the research was really trying to get to the level of the corporations themselves. So like the first one, I build up a kind of a general theme, a general structure. And then in the second paper, I looked into the guidelines, how corporations deal with the social obligation through CSR schemes. And in the last one, I've tried to really get to the deeds of the corporations themselves. I didn't do that by sampling or interviewing people from corporations. I did that by analyzing sustainability reports as a proxy for the behavior of corporations. A sustainability report, or some might call that a non-financial report, is a methodology on which, through which corporation report the environmental, social, and governance behavior. There's a methodology for that called, hold on. There's a methodology that called GRI, and there are several methodologies in different places in the world. But a sustainability report, it's a good place if you wanna look into big samples of corporations, to the output of a textual output of their conduct. Of course, it can be accompanied by other research tools, such as really sampling or interviewing executive managers and or employees, and understanding how do the corporation behave. But that's a good way to do that, and there's a lot of literature about analyzing sustainability reports and understanding by that how corporations really behave. And this is what I did with 24 different sustainability reports. It's not 24 different companies, but only 5 companies, which were the largest 5 banks in Israel, and their publication through 5 years. So I surveyed those reports, all published in English, and I by using textual software, tried to understand how aging appears in those sustainability reports. And the fact that I took banks as a sample was that banks are the only sector in Israel in which a sustainability report is a mandatory requirement. For the rest of the companies in Israel, the rest of the corporation in Israel, publishing a sustainability report, it's a voluntary act. No one asks them to do that. But for Israeli bank, it's a requirement of the regulator. I think the most interesting thing for me to reveal in this paper, that if we are looking to the result, and that's what we call a text search query. So that's kind of a result about what are the themes that are presented in the text in relation to the keyword that you are looking for. So when you look about in what context aging appears in those reports, or the context is the context of caring for aging parents. And that's one of most, and all of us that are dealing with caregivers and caregiving, and as a caregiver on my own, a lot of employers are very are dealing a lot with the energy and also the resources that their employees are diverting to take care of their aging parents. And that's a real issue globally, and of course in Israel, and it is, and it shows from the reports. And aging as a general theme is hardly present in the 24 reports. And when it does appear, it is mainly in the context of aid for elderly parents and employees. So it's not like taking care of their retirees or their employees or the community or giving service or servicizing their older clients or customers. That's not the issue that is being presented by corporation. The issue is the fact that their employees are very much engaged with taking care of the older parents, and in the sustainability report they show how the corporation is assisting them in doing that, and that quite a lot of corporations, I know that in Israel, that are offering kind of support programs for the employees that need to take care of the parents. There's a lot of bureaucracy around that, and there's a lot of work. The final chapter in my work is trying to set forth very concrete reporting guidelines on aging for corporations. I didn't put them all here, but they are very concrete steps that each and every corporation, on my belief, should put into place when trying to address the issue of aging with different Toronto stakeholders, with its employees, and that's kind of very practical guidance that I'm offering or presenting at the end of the work. And as I told you before, once my work will be finally approved, and I think it should happen in the coming weeks, then I'll be able to disseminate these guidelines. I'll do that in different networks and social networks, and hopefully some corporation will embrace that or take them into consideration. And as I told you, as I promised at the beginning, why I called my project CSR 65.0, because CSR is a term that in every couple of years someone said is coming forward and saying, well, CSR is dead, and now let's reinvent CSR with CSR 2.0, and then someone said, well, there's a need for a new version of CSR, and if some of you is following the current debate about the role of corporation in the COVID-19 epidemic, you can see that there's some are trying to justify the issue of social responsibility, and some say that there's a need to reinvent the corporation and create again the purpose-driven corporations. There's a lot of work around that, a lot of writing about that, and I've took that to a bit of the extreme, and I termed my work as CSR 65.0. 65, you know, as a kind of the compulsory retirement age in different countries. That's in brief the concept of corporate gerontology, of corporate geronto responsibility, the guidelines, and I'm very open for questions, ideas, remarks, anything you wanna share. You can just open your mic and talk, or we can do that on the chat or whatever you feel like to do. With your permission, I'll just stop the share. And